My name is Benjamin Nicholson, and my play at the 2021 Hollywood Fringe Festival is called Deathless and Taxless, a corporate exorcism. If any of that sounds like it might be interesting to you, take a listen or a watch of this video and find out a little bit more. For me, it's interesting the way that I came to theater is maybe slightly unconventional for people who write plays, perform, see theater. I actually wasn't that involved with anything you would call theatrical performance until this kind of bizarre collision of things I was studying in college. I was studying music and literary arts, but both of the kind of programs of study I in were kind of these experimental forms of each of the fields. So in music, I was doing electronic music, and in literary arts, I was doing electronic writing. And as I was trying to think of what I could do with both of these different disciplines, sort of the performance of music and writing, what kind of emerged from it was this bizarre kind of playwriting, at the time, solo playwriting practice where I would spend a lot of time kind of writing what I would say during a performance. And then in the midst of performance, there would be these odd kind of musical interludes. And so I think what that then led me to was I learned about playwright Richard Foreman, who does really kind of strange productions. And I think that was kind of how I started to get into, what you might call theater. And in particular, I think what I've really enjoyed about the Hollywood Fringe Festival is one particular site of theater, and what's probably accelerated my desire to keep doing it is I've seen kind of more professional, quote unquote, professional productions, on Broadway and other places. And those are very enjoyable and entertaining, but the kind of resourcefulness that people need to employ to be able to do kind of one of these small shows in a venue where you kind of have rapid turnover and, there's a lot of shows going on, is what's been really exciting to me, because in order to have those kinds of shows and to share with people that sort of work, it's not just about, having a venue that, if it's built, they will come, but it's really about kind of the social context that produces people's desire to see shows and share things. And so that's sort of the realm of theater I'm really interested in. And I arrived at it in this kind of weird, hybrid of musicianship and more kind of literary writing, and wanting to find a way to share my efforts in each of those fields. I think for me, in terms of becoming really excited about writing and actually kind of processing a lot of the way I understand the world through writing, really emerges from spending a lot of time reading as a kid. And that being kind of, I grew up in this, kind of small rural town in New Hampshire. We did, early days of the internet. So there was, some kind of outlets to the world outside. But for me, reading, I think, was just always kind of the most exciting way to engage with culture. And, not necessarily to say the things that I was reading would be considered, the highest of high culture. I, read a lot of what would be called, probably now fan fiction, but sort of the published Star Wars, expanded universe books were a big part of my childhood. And then, in school, you're sort of required to do writing, but I think it really, similarly with my interest in performing and what has become an interest in theater, my, kind of love of writing as something I really wanted to share with other people, I think emerged for me during college. And finding that, when you have a moment or several moments to kind of work through the ways that you'd like to use language, and sort of putting it down, seeing what it looks like and feels like, being able to re-engage with it later, and then being able to share it with people, somewhere along the way. Just that whole process of working through and playing with language intuitively felt really compelling. And because, music has been such a big part of my life as well, I think I approach writing in a way that feels very similar for me, to musical composition, where it's maybe a little bit more textural and, based on kind of, theme and variation, or using repetition with changes that you can sort of tease out some of what might be going on in your own mind, or your reckoning of the world in ways that often elude language. So I think there's something really fascinating and exciting to me about playing with language to try to get it to do things that language really struggles to do. We obviously all have a desire to be understood and to sort of imagine we can get what's in our minds out into the world and into other people's minds, but language, is not a mode of telepathy. And so there's all sorts of interesting things that can happen in that process of trying to share language. And I think that's where a lot of my love for playing with it comes from. So I think one of the things that I find really compelling about sort of the actual experience of, theater as a mode of communication, cultural exchange, sharing time with people, again, with the background in music I have, it's a lot of the same sorts of things that excite me at playing a show or being part of an audience of a music show. People talk a lot about this idea of liveness, which is definitely a part of it. But I think there's something, and there are different sorts of theater or concerts that you can go to, but particularly those ones that have a kind of intimacy where it seems like there's a desire for some kind of exchange between, say, the people, proverbially on stage, or whatever the format of the theater is, and the people who are the hypothetical audience. That desire for something to move between those people in the moment in which that space is kind of enacted, I think is what feels really special to me about theater as a tradition. Other media forms that are more kind of unilateral or broadcast oriented, that there's sort of a fixed media form that's being delivered to someone, of course, can do a lot of phenomenal things as well. But there's nothing for me as a performer quite like the experience of being in a place with other people, and just, I guess, the way that it feels inside my body and my mind, sort of performing something I've written or being part of something that someone else has put together. And the way I think of it is as sharing it with the people who are there. It's just incredibly, I think, pleasurable experience, and also one where, in the maybe less pleasurable moments, when there's moments of tension or anxiety, I feel like opens me up to sort of the most rapid form of learning and discovery. Just the kind of awareness that I feel like I can have of other people and myself in those circumstances is very different than, say, even like right now, where, as you might detect, there's a little bit of a digging in my mind for the right words to pull out and put forward. And, sometimes it's nice to get away from that version of myself and be, what people might call a little more present. And so I think that's one of the things that's really special about the tradition of theater, and the different ways that people augment that tradition. So it's interesting for me, the way that I arrive at kind of what you might call, say, like the final output, which is always going to be different from time to time. But a lot of the work that I do in performance is actually deeply influenced by the time that I spent doing business development in Silicon Valley. Where business development is basically you're trying to get other companies to work with or collaborate with the company that you're working at. And a big part of that ends up being, of course, PowerPoint presentations, but also a mixture of kind of maybe more conventional storytelling about what it is that you find important about the thing that you're doing, but also trying to establish that kind of social bond between you and the people who you're working with, because it ultimately the thing you're trying to do is yield some sort of collaboration. So a lot of my work is very PowerPoint oriented, as in PowerPoint presentations are a big part of a lot of the performance work that I do. And it's not, there's a certain amount of satirizing and irony that's present, because PowerPoint is such an amusing way that we've all decided we should use to communicate with one another, given how tedious it is to make PowerPoint presentations and how tedious it is to consume them or witness them. but starting from, that as kind of a format, it's done a lot to help me kind of frame, how do the performances I put together actually unfold. And so, not to pigeonhole myself into being exclusively a PowerPoint presentation performer, but using sort of the structures of how you present ideas through PowerPoint helps a lot with the framing of what my performances end up being. And then there's a lot of writing that goes into, kind of the presentation of what I'm going to say. And a lot of what I do does have very specific, scripted use of language. But I think what's important to me as well is to create, and this is, something that very much comes from different modes of music, jazz being one of them, where you have things that are fixed, and then you have things that have a structure underneath where improvisation and difference can occur each time, you do the performance. And so I try to give myself a sense of structure. So I feel sort of held by the structure, and therefore can have a basis of comfort from which I can do things that are more experimental, more improvisational. And the play that I'm working on for this Hollywood Fringe Festival, the whole second half, for my performance of it is largely improvised. And this is one of the first times I've had that great of a portion of what I'm doing just kind of emerge from what is happening in the moment of that particular show. I first heard about the Hollywood Fringe Festival in my first year of my PhD program at the University of Southern California, in this sort of slightly strange program called Media Arts in Practice, where the PhD students, graduate students, are doing a hybrid of kind of what you might call a creative practice and research. And my practice is kind of performance, and what I'm researching, the maybe simplest way to describe it that hopefully wouldn't bore folks, is kind of what is the friction between, contemporary modes of capitalism and processes of death and dying. And so I, as part of my coursework, was in a solo performance class with a professor there and someone who's been long associated with Fringe in Hollywood, Deborah DeLiso. And I was developing a one person show in that class called The Last PowerPoint, which was about, sort of corporate business development person being, trying to sort of share the urgent thing that they need to tell people about, but without their PowerPoint presentation. For some reason, it's failed or isn't available. And what happens when you don't have a PowerPoint presentation to help comfort and guide you. And so in some ways, it was responding to my own practice of frequently utilizing PowerPoint in performance and imagining what would happen if it wasn't there, and why I'm so reticent to do that in my performance. And Deborah, working with her in the class, encouraged me to submit the performance or develop it into kind of a full play, and submit it to the Hollywood Fringe Festival. And I hadn't heard about it up to that point, and being someone not from Los Angeles, I think maybe was a little bit skeptical at first of what it would mean to be doing theater in Hollywood, given that I do performance. I consider myself a performer, but not I never have really considered myself a theatrical performer. It's been maybe more aligned with what you might call performance art. Not that there's a firm distinction, but some people might make a distinction. And just through working with Deborah, was told that no, Hollywood Fringe Festival is a very different kind of experience than you might expect with being around a lot of kind of actors and performers in Hollywood. And she was completely right. One of the things that was really helpful in terms of feeling excited about participating in the Fringe Festival was the tremendous effort that a lot of the folks at Fringe and at some of the venues made to allow people to understand what the experience actually would be, and how deeply rooted it is in social connections, as opposed to just trying to promote and get people to come see your show. And so, so I've done the Fringe Festival once before, in 2019, was going to do it in 2020, but for COVID. And for this year, now that Fringe will be back on in Hollywood in a form, given that there's still some caution around COVID and its possible effects on people who are coming to attend really wanted to get back into sharing the things that I'm working on, but also seeing the things that other people are kind of going out of their way to share and have put a lot of energy and love into. That's also a tremendous part of the experience of Fringe. It's not only sharing with people who you're excited to meet and learn about what you're working on, but also to, get a chance to have shared with you the things that they're, equally passionate about, but coming from the very different places that other people come from. So I think it was really that first experience at Fringe that made me want to do it again. And then that desire to do it again, led to what am I concerned about right now? What am I working through right now? And the play kind of emerged out of that. When I was working with Deborah DeLiso in my solo performance class, and she was encouraging me to participate in Fringe, I didn't really know where to start. And she said, the best person to reach out to would be Matthew Quinn, who runs Theater Asylum. She's had really good experiences with them. And I think knew that Matthew and Berta, who run Asylum, do a really tremendous job, not only of, getting shows up and running that are really exciting and interesting, but helping people who are putting those shows on to feel like they're a part of a community and ultimately to really support one another by seeing each other's shows and being there for one another. And so, one of the things that Theater Asylum does is hold a lot of kind of information sessions, meet and greets. And of course, pre-COVID, these things were happening in person, which maybe, facilitated some of the getting to know people a little more rapidly than some of what we've had to do on Zoom. But just my, initial experiences sort of going into the information sessions, getting to meet people were immediately affirming of oh, okay, this is a place, I could belong. These are people who I could be friends with, who I could support, who, could support me. And after, just a few interactions with the folks at Asylum, it, didn't take long for me to feel okay, this is definitely something I want to do. And, I also ended up developing a really close relationship with Pam Knowles, who's one of the folks who does stage management or has done a lot of stage management with Asylum. And, as, Matthew will often say, the people that you meet at Fringe, you not only, might become your friends, but you might end up working with them on, future Fringe festivals. And so Pam is a kind of featured part of our contributor, collaborator for my new show now. Is also doing my stage managing, but is also, in addition to that, performing as a very critical, character in the performance. So the show that I'm doing, which is called Deathless and Taxless, a corporate exorcism, is in some ways has a lot to do with kind of my coming into my own understanding of my sort of how I exist in the world. Being a, white guy who's had access to a lot of what would be considered, a quality education and comes from what maybe at least would have used to be, called the middle class, although it's unclear exactly what, classes exist now with increasing kind of income disparities. Looking at myself and sort of the way that I've been able to live and the access that I've had to, resources and experience in business and things like that. And finding that there are elements of that experience that, as I become more aware of other ways that people exist and basically, frankly, just encounter more different kinds of people, realizing that there are, aspects of the privilege that I have and the things I've been able to do in my life that maybe come from a place of deep unfairness or injustice, and not in a way that's self-flagellating and that I'm trying to make myself feel bad about myself. That's not really the spirit of it, but really trying to explore what are the mechanisms that allow for me to exist the way I do. And given all of the sort of privilege and access that I have, why do I still feel, at times this kind of deep malaise or dismay at sort of the state or condition of, the social structure that I'm part of? So mixing that in with my experiences in Silicon Valley, coming to understand that there's a tremendously damaging and toxic role that the form of what we call the corporation plays in our social structure, both domestically within the United States, but also globally as part of a what I would refer to as a heavily neoliberalized kind of world ideology. Becoming fascinated by historically, how did this form in the corporation come to be so powerful, and maybe more importantly, why does it feel like we can't do anything about it? Those were the sort of experiences that led me to want to write this show, which is my way of trying to manage my own response to the literal research that I've done, as it's part of my dissertation work for my PhD. But the way that the show, I guess if there's a story to the show, it's the first half of it is literally called in the show a didactic lecture about the corporation and its presence in the world that we occupy, presented in a PowerPoint presentation in a very neoliberal corporate way. And the second half of the show is an exorcism, where I try to remove or have removed from me the corporate demon that I am, comparing to this, I guess, the sorts of exorcisms you might be familiar with in kind of, popular culture in movies like The Exorcist, or, and any kind of popular consciousness understandings of what demonic possession might be, using that as both sort of a metaphor, but also a quite literal explanation for how the corporation exists in us in a very personal and local way, and trying to imagine how could, especially someone who's a white guy of relative privilege, like how I can remove those things from myself and cease to be part of the reproduction of the corporate form or neoliberalism, and what it would mean, if that were to come to pass, if I could de-neoliberalize to some extent, what that might mean for me, and then more broadly, what it might mean for other folks who are, I would say, suffering kind of the same affliction, or willingly participating in the ongoingness of this affliction. So for Deathless and Taxless, I'm working with Pam Knowles, who I'd worked with on my previous Hollywood Fringe Festival show, The Last PowerPoint. In the previous show, Pam was a presence in the show in that she, did actually interact with me, but in the capacity of my stage manager, being, in that show, refusing to display my PowerPoint presentation because, per the conceit of The Last PowerPoint, I didn't pay her the fees for stage managing my show, and therefore my PowerPoint presentation wasn't available, thus the whole rest of the show to follow. In this particular show, I'm working with Pam quite a bit more closely in the exorcism portion of the show to essentially have myself, or I guess allowing for me to perform as what I am referring to in the play as the corporate demon, and for Pam as sort of a foil to my character, or the version of myself I'm portraying, to perform as the exorcist, sort of leading the audience in a collaborative ritual to help expunge the corporate demon from my body, or what I'm calling in the show my corpse. And so, not only is Pam actually a performer in the show, and not only is Pam, literally managing as part of the show, but also very practically the kind of technical logistics of, the show as it happens. And I should mention that our show is entirely stream-based for several reasons, one of which being COVID, but another which is there's a desire to play with this idea of Zoom and what it represents as a thing that brings us together, yet is still has the specter of kind of corporate surveillance hanging over it, but that we're all essentially willing to participate in, knowing that to some extent. So yeah, not only is Pam stage managing and performing as this sort of exorcist in the show, but Pam and I are also collaborating very closely on how are we framing the show to people? What kinds of, in this exorcism, there'll be, questions from the audience that will challenge the corporate demon. What kinds of questions are we trying to elicit? And, what sorts of interrogations of the demon will actually be damaging to it? And, if the demon is a, metaphor for sort of corporate possession of our psychologies or our psyches, then how could this line of questioning and the performance of it in front of an audience actually lead to, not seismic changes in the people who are present, but an avenue through which people can question certain aspects of their lives and consider how, where are, kind of corporate interests that are ultimately deleterious to the majority of people. Where are those things a part of people's behavior, and are there things we can do about it? But to try to do all of those things in a way that is feels collaborative, as opposed to the kind of more neoliberal solution to any problem, which is that you should just take personal responsibility for it and fix it yourself. So Pam's been a big part of being a collaborator, and in the spirit of the show, that I think is about a desire for more collaboration in our day-to-day lives, is an attempt, I think, to kind of actualize that, and has been a really great partner in putting the show together. I would love if, for the audience after seeing this show, to not necessarily come away with sort of a bullet point list of, the ways that the, corporate form is, demonic or evil in some way. There'll be some of that in the show, just kind of explanations of the corporation as it's existed historically. But I think what I'd be much more excited for people to get out of it is maybe in a similar way that music affects you, that you're, maybe going about your day at a, certain point after having seen the show, and maybe you're at your workplace and there's an opportunity to do just exhibit some little behavior that might allow you to advance because it's putting someone else down or undermining someone else. And in those moments that there's maybe just like with music, like when, you're feeling sad or happy and a song comes into your head, there might be a recollection of a certain aspect of the play that says, maybe it wouldn't be, even if it seems like a small thing, maybe I don't need to harm another person in order to, propel and grow my career. And then from there, maybe thoughts, follow of like, why do I care so much about my career? For whom is my career? Who is it for? Who does it benefit? Those are the sorts of things I would love to have emerge for people, is just, those kinds of day-to-day considerations about how their lives are being affected by this broader, and very deliberately engineered social structure that is, aggressively expanding its purview and resources as time continues to go by. And then, maybe more a little closer to home, I would love to, have emerge from this show the possibility of meeting new people, since, people in the audience will be able to ask questions and interact with, this demon version of myself directly. There's always some hope that could lead to a conversation or a relationship or a friendship or a collaboration, beyond the confines of the showtime. And I think that's a big part of Fringe. It's a big part of the spirit of Fringe as well. So I think that would be something I would love as well for folks who come to see the show, to the extent that they're interested, to keep, in touch with me and Pam, and to teach us things they know about or that they're excited about, and, potentially, contribute to a collaborative effort to what would take a collaborative effort to not have to structure so much of our existence around the interests of corporations and incredibly wealthy, often, older white men. I think people should come to my play at Fringe because I think, and this is true of a lot of shows at Fringe, but I'll just speak for mine. I think, Pam and I have really put it together with the audience in mind. We're not putting this together because we want to kind of aggrandize ourselves, or because we want, I guess, more kind of fame-based affirmation, which isn't really something that, at least in my experience of the Hollywood Fringe, is not really what most people are in it for. But I think, coming to our show, you'll be addressed directly. The show is about engaging directly with the people who happen to be at any particular show. And not that I know that not everyone is comfortable kind of participating or interacting in a performance, but there is an explicit, half of the show that is about kind of direct interaction with the audience and giving the audience a chance to more than air grievances about the current state of our socioeconomic form, but to challenge an avatar of the corporation in the form of the demon that will surface from my body, to be able to put questions to that demon and to potentially be able to undo some of its power. We're hoping that there's a potential for catharsis, exploration, play that can come for that for folks who are interested in that kind of interaction, that will be made available. And I think that, Pam and I are working really hard to create a context in which that feels possible for an audience, but also that there are stakes to it, that there's something meaningful to be done by interacting with us. And so, yeah, I think, there's going to be a lot of really fantastic shows at Fringe, and different shows are going to mean a lot to different people, but we're trying to be very, very conscientious about the people who come to see the show and give them something that will be impactful and where they feel like there's a stake for them in being present, and that it's not just about sort of us, kind of promoting the things that we care about, that the audience is an important part of the experience that we're hoping to share. So one of the things I'm looking forward to I think this is at least partially true of any time I perform a show, is, just that experience of getting to be present with other people, sharing something I'm excited about, and then really trying to create space to allow, folks to share back by, directly participating in the show. I'm really excited about knowing that it's a very fragile thing, and it's a very difficult thing to create a space where an audience or a witness to a show feels like they can contribute directly to the show, but hoping very much that we can create that space, and that surprising and novel and strange and challenging kind of interactions and interjections can emerge from that will change me, that I can come away from these shows and having interacted with people and through them, whether through direct questioning during the half of the show where people are actually able to talk, or through interacting with people after the show, that I can be affected by the way that, and understand new things about myself and other people through the way that people respond to what I do. And then I think there's also the maybe a little more intuitive pleasure of just the ritual of gathering people to share with them something that you've prepared, like a show. It just feels in one's, body, one's corpse, one's mind. It's an experience that you can't replicate it unless you're actually doing that thing. And it's a special and for me, at least, a relatively rare thing to be performing in front of people, with sharing something that I've spent so much time working on. And so, yeah, I guess very much looking forward to being in that set of circumstances and really appreciating what it means that, I have the opportunity to be able to do this. And, hopefully, through some of the themes of the show and relationships that can emerge from it, continue to be a part of what I think Fringe does a great job of creating the platform and opportunity for more people to get to have that experience of being, a performer who gets to share something with people, with people who they care about, share something that they really care about. The Hollywood Fringe Festival is, at least in my experience in Los Angeles, probably the most affirming kind of, cultural experience that I've had. I should say that I, haven't lived in Los Angeles for an incredibly long amount of time. And, the kinds of things that I've spent time doing are, of course, influenced by who I am and what I feel comfortable and drawn to. But, that being said, at Fringe, it's just really remarkable, the, and not to just talk about, I guess, variety for variety's sake, but just the different kinds of people and the different kinds of interests that you encounter under the umbrella of, by and large, a shared desire to share. It's a kind of a social model that, not that that you could take a Hollywood Fringe Festival and make it a model of social organization for the entire world, because it's happens for a limited amount of time, and it is obviously very much themed around theater shows, but the kind of camaraderie and affinity that people are willing to, and the vulnerability people are willing to demonstrate to be a part of it, both as an audience and as a performer, is just incredibly affirming of those aspects of existing as a human person that I feel like are often not made available in at least in a lot of my day-to-day experience under conditions of working and competition and anxieties about career, and to a certain extent money making. Fringe is really an experience driven by people who are really excited to share things that they're excited about and want to develop relationships around that excitement. Fringe is not where a lot of folks are going to with an intent to try to make a lot of money or become famous or become canonical figures in the theater world. That can happen occasionally from Fringe, but for most people, it's coming from a much more local desire to see, be seen, to appreciate, be appreciated, and to have that kind of ethos happening for the duration that Fringe happens for and at the scale that it's happening is something that I've rarely found in my life of participating in and experiencing people sharing, creating and sharing culture, and so I would highly recommend putting your own show up at Fringe or just going to see as many shows as you can, because with the reasons that people are doing it, it can, even if a show isn't exactly the sort of thing you would normally like, there's something that feels really, really lovely about having things shared with you in the way that people share things at Fringe, that I haven't found anywhere else in Los Angeles, at least up to this point in my time there. Hollywood Fringe is, and anything that kind of resembles the ethos that I described that Fringe had, I think are incredibly important to not just local communities, but even broader possibilities of social affinity, that extend beyond just a place like Hollywood, because they demonstrate very palpably and concretely, in some sense, but also with a tremendous deal of subtlety because of all the differences amongst people, what kinds of things are possible when people come into agreement to demonstrate a desire for affinity across difference. There, within Los Angeles or even Hollywood itself, of course, there's a lot of stratification and sort of different areas where there might be a sense that certain people belong certain places and certain people belong other places. And I think Hollywood, the Fringe Festival, does not proceed based on those assumptions. There's maybe there is an assumption that you have some interest in theater, but I think the types of productions that are at the Fringe Festival are, there's essentially something for everybody, and things that would challenge everybody, but that are accessible and shared with a certain ethos of kindness and care. And so, for the kind of local community, it's just, in terms of being able to mobilize the number of people that end up coming and to see the, variety of things that you can see all concentrated in one place, particularly when Fringe is able to be, really, fully up and running live, which, with all, hope and desire, COVID will cease to be the presence that it is sometime in the near future. It really shows just how lovely things can be by having different people in affinity with one another in the same place at the same time. But then I think from that, and this is something I've talked about with Matthew Quinn, that's really exciting about, the fact that there are fringes all over, not just the country, but the world. If people learn, especially for people like me who are very highly neoliberalized and have, really been taught and often benefited, at least superficially, from this idea of independence and doing things yourself and competing. It's a real eye-opening experience to see like how good it can feel to not be invested in those kind of narcissistic, competitive modes of being. And it makes you want to be that way with other people in other places beyond Fringe. And so I think that's one of the more powerful things, or the most powerful things, is after, at least for me, after having had the experience at Fringe, it made me want to not replicate that exact experience in other parts of my life, but it made me more aware of how other parts of my life didn't feel that way and didn't feel good, and made me, want to try to behave differently, or at least have a different awareness of other, ask other social contexts in which I circulate. And I think from just having that awareness, the possibility, and having an example of how things can an otherwise that could exist, it enters into the realm of possibility that meaningful kind of social change is possible, which isn't to say that Hollywood Fringe in and of itself is a solution to the seismic social and economic, racial, supremacist issues that we have, but it gives an intuitive sense of what it might feel like for, to live in a different kind of social existence. And I think that's, it's a really special thing. And ultimately it comes down to the people who are participating in it. And it's just really exciting to get to have that occasional realization of like, oh, there are a lot of really tremendous people, in this place, many of who I never would have encountered other than for the opportunity of, having some kind of gathering like Fringe. Local theater, and really any kind of local cultural kind of initiative or place where people can, if you think of, why a lot of people participate, or my experience of why a lot of people participate in theater, or at least the kind of local theater that you see at Hollywood Fringe, it's because they really want to share something. They really want to have affinity and have care and exchange with people. And a lot of the excitement around being able to do this in a theater context emerges from the sense, for some people at least, that there's a dearth of opportunities to do that. Living in a, again, as clearly my interest, as my play is about this, and I keep talking about it, but, existing kind of a socio-economic context where we're constantly encouraged to develop our own careers, our, personal brands, further, our own standing, grow a legacy, be significant unto ourselves. It can often feel like there's very little platform where some kind of collaborative, just kindness oriented or care oriented sharing can occur. And I think local theater, local music, local art often for a lot of people ends up being a place where those things feel possible. And because those institutions, to the extent that you can even in some cases call them institutions, are so under threat in terms of not being able to be financed, being seen as, by those of a more right-wing bent as being a threat to the maintenance of currently existing power structures. It's, because, those institutions are under threat in their own way, it feels incredibly important when there is an opportunity to participate in, support, acknowledge, attend, things, events like Hollywood Fringe that, I guess for me, it feels like really urgent to do so, because if those, events or those institutions aren't supported, they can very easily disappear, as has been the trend, especially in kind of public financing of the arts in the United States. And so, there's simultaneously the more intuitive, it feels good to be a part of this sort of experience aspect of it, but then there's also the longer term kind of political and existential stakes of what kind of existence would we like to have, and do we really want to have an existence where it's almost impossible to have an experience with the arts because you can only access it through incredibly expensive concert tickets or very, very high end things that very few people have access to. And I think most people feel like, no, we'd like to be able to have experience with people sharing things creatively without it being limited only to those who have wealth. I guess the only other thing I would mention about my show that we haven't talked about yet is that I think for me, there is an intention, and we talked about this in a way, but there's like a very real intention for once Fringe is over to continue developing this particular show and or the things that emerge from it, that I'm not, very much trying to create what feels like a considered and encapsulated experience within the hour of this particular show's running time. But there's a really true desire to actually be attentive to what comes out of the show for me and for people who are part of it in one way or another, and then think about what could happen after Fringe or at next Fringe, or could we be friends, could we have a relationship, or could the show continue in other ways. Not at all to be enthusiastic about why we're all using, or so many of us are using, Zoom now, but I think one of the things that is exciting from the standpoint of being able to share things in a way that meet people where they're at is with people's increasing comforts with kind of telepresent communication. It makes it seem much more possible or viable that you could have all sorts of ad hoc gatherings of people who are in very different parts of the world doing very different things in a way that could feel deeply significant, which isn't to say that the way we've been using Zoom, or that we've sort of netted out on how we use Zoom, feels deeply significant, but just as another route to be with people, even if it's in a different way than being co-present with them, is really exciting from the standpoint of sharing ideas and developing relationships. And so, that's I think a big part of what I'm excited to observe and witness that comes out of the show is, am I going to learn things, or are other people going to learn things that might allow us to continue, developing the relationships and ideas that are in this show or in other shows people are doing beyond the Fringe Festival. And as I've mentioned, that to me feels very much in the spirit of the Hollywood Fringe Festival, that, people are not just looking to do their show and get out, but actually looking to incorporate the things that are happening at Hollywood Fringe into their ongoing existences in a meaningful way. So I think that's something I'm really looking forward to, or excited to see if it comes out of it. My name is Benjamin Nicholson, and my play at the Hollywood Fringe Festival in 2021 is Deathless and Taxless, a corporate exorcism. If you found any of this conversation or these thoughts interesting, I would love to have you come to any of our Zoom exclusive shows, where you will have the opportunity to directly ask a corporate demon some of the burning questions that you have about your and our shared neoliberal existence. So looking forward to getting to share some time with you, and be safe out there.